This is Erin. In this video, I will be talking about ethnographic decision trees and how they will be used in our field study. So the term ethnography comes from the field of anthropology and is the study of people and cultures. Ethnographic decision trees can be used to predict the choices that people make under specific circumstances and can be used with any recurring decision. So the research question that we're hoping to answer using this methodology is what factors are most important in deciding whether a household should, one, purchase, and two, consistently use an improved cook stove? And does this change with context? So as ethnographic decision trees must be used with a behavior that's recurring, the first part of the research question, interest in how people will decide to purchase an improved cook stove, will be answered through interviews and surveys, ultimately informing a user journey map, like you can see here. The second part of the research question, looking at factors influencing the use of improved cook stoves, is a recurring behavior though, and so that can be used with ethnographic decision trees and will be the focus of the rest of this video. So the general steps that are used to create ethnographic decision trees are first selecting a behavior to model, which in this case is cook stove use, and elicit decision criteria from a sample of respondents. Next, the criteria are turned into a survey and disseminated to a representative sample of people. So this would be across the different contexts. The survey data is then used to build a hierarchical decision model, which I'll talk more about. And lastly, the model can be tested on a new sample of people to validate that the model actually can be used to predict behavior. So let's break down each one of these steps a little bit more. So let's say we are interested in exploring how people decide to use their various stoves across 3 different contexts. Participants would be asked to think of the last time they used one of their cook stoves and what cook stove they used and why. For the first participant, you would record their response, and as you go through, you'll build off of each participant's response. So for example, I put together this example table, purely fictitious for just example purposes. So let's say you talk with participant 1 and you say, what stove was the last one that you used and why? And so they say the last stove they used was their improved charcoal cook stove, and their reason for using it was that they were boiling water for tea. So first, this opens up an opportunity to discuss this. So if they have other stoves, why didn't they use those? All of this information could be recorded additionally, because let's say that it came down to fuel availability. They used their charcoal stove because they didn't have wood for their wood stove. Then that's something that we'd want to record as well. Kind of getting to the root of why they used that stove. If it was because their improved charcoal cook stove is fast and they just wanted something fast to boil their tea, then that's another thing that we would record here. So all of these things are getting recorded here. But I just put was boiling water for tea for simplicity. So then you'd move on and you talk with participant 2 and you would say the same thing. Think of the last time you used one of your cook stoves. What cook stove did you use and why? And let's say they used their 3-stone fire because they needed heat for their home. So that opens up, again, another line of questioning. Why didn't they choose to use another stove for this task? Different questions around that. Additionally, you're going to follow up and also ask them about the decision criteria that participant 1 gave. So if you were boiling water for tea, what stove would you use and why? And so basically, we're just validating responses and seeing if we start to see trends. So let's say they were like, oh, I would also use my improved charcoal cook stove. Well, why is that? Oh, well, I would use it because it's fast. So that's where we start seeing more and more trends and get more insight. So then you go on to participant 3, ask the same question. Let's say they were using their improved biomass cook stove because they were cooking this specific meal. And so following that line of questioning, what about the meal requires the stove to be used? Like, would you ever consider using the other ones, and recording those responses? And then following up with, if you were to boil water for tea, what stove would you use? And if you needed heat for your home, what stove would you use? So continuing to build that out. So if you have participant 4, you would ask the same thing, and now you would ask these 3 questions here. So, and that just goes on. So these decision criteria can then be put into a survey, and disseminated to a sample of people from each context of interest as shown here. So what stove would you use if you were boiling tea, if you needed heat for your home, if you were preparing a meal? And then they would respond with the stove that they would use. An additional thing that we'd like to collect here too is how often do they do this? And so this can be refined because, let's say, for how many times a week do you need heat for your home? Obviously, that's going to change by season, but basically, fine-tuning this for whatever the criteria are, but getting an understanding of how often this decision is made. Because if it's, I do this 3 times a day, that's important information to capture versus, I only do this maybe twice a year, which means that it's probably less of an important decision criteria to focus on. After collecting this information, using the information gained from part 1 and part 2 with the surveys shown here, a hierarchical decision tree can be made by either forming logical if-then rules or by plugging the data into the tech adoption software that I developed last spring for this specific purpose, which I can describe in more detail in another video. So for example, one research paper, because these can be kind of tricky to explain, so I'm going to use the example of another research paper that did this. They were interested in using this methodology to predict whether or not someone recycled the last empty can that they were holding on a nationally representative sample of Americans. So from a survey of 30 plus questions, they found that it only took 3 decision criteria to predict whether or not someone recycled with 90% accuracy. So let's say up here we have our survey and we have, similarly, maybe 30 questions. Going through this process of building a decision tree, we might find that it comes down to a few decision criteria, for example, which would be really interesting. And so what they found is that if someone was at home and they also recycle other products, they were most likely to recycle their can. If they weren't at home, the next most important decision criteria was whether or not they were close to a recycling bin. And so this was able to predict with around 90% accuracy. And so we want to do a similar thing here. So I'll give an example in a second. So the last step is then validating the model by repeating step 2 on a new sample of participants. So you would disseminate a survey and then use the survey to compare what respondents actually said versus what this decision tree, based on their responses, would have predicted their response to be. So the outputs from this portion of the field study is basically getting a more nuanced understanding of which stoves are used and why, which can be helpful for marketing and for cook stove design. So for example, let's say that people keep using their improved cook stove for tasks that they want to complete quickly. That is insight that can be used for marketing as well as potential new cook stove designs in the future. But additionally, outputs from this can help in the development of if-then rules. So for example, if I own an improved cook stove and I need to complete a cooking task quickly, then I will use this improved cook stove to complete this task, those kind of rules. And these can be used with agent-based modeling, which I plan on discussing in more detail in another video. So that was just a quick overview of ethnographic decision trees, and hopefully it's more clear on the benefits of using this and some of the insights that can be gained.